I was told I could talk about anything I want, quote unquote. And so I made some slides, and now I'm going to throw them away. So essentially what's interesting, I don't know how many of you know who I am or what I've done, so I'll do a 1-minute bio. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I founded a couple of internet companies, including a company called Razorfish. I was around at the beginning of the internet on something called The Well, arguing with a man named John Perry Barlow about the need for encryption in the world. That's interesting because I probably wouldn't be in crypto today if it wasn't for him convincing me that cryptography matters. So I was originally a cypherpunk and got really into this idea of encryption being sort of a revolutionary thing. Speaking to Mr. Spanos, who I'd love to talk actually, it's fantastic. And so really, I'd like to take us back for a minute because we've been talking about the future and how exciting it is and how everything's happening, but I think we often forget the fundamental principles of why we're here. So in 2008, every day being Halloween, on October 31st, Satoshi released her white paper. So by the way, on that point, I have an opinion about Satoshi's identity. I believe it is not a her or a him. I believe it is a they. I happen to know that one of those people is a woman. And my view is, since men have been taking credit for women's accomplishments for about 150 years, why not let the woman take a responsibility for their accomplishment this time? So she released her white paper. And the white paper came out, everyone forgets sort of what was happening at that time. For the last 36 days before then, the global financial markets were in free fall. Most people, particularly those who had savings accounts, college funds, retirement funds, had managed pensions, lost fortunes. The bankers did not. And if you think this didn't inform her thinking as she was thinking about releasing this paper, you're crazy, because you didn't spend any time on any of the threads I did on bulletin board services in places like this at this time, where people were going crazy and wanted to overthrow the state and get rid of money. And there had been a lot of attempts at digital money before. There was eCash, which I think I still have somewhere on an old BlackBerry if anyone knows how to boot it back up. There was other people who looked at the idea of digital money, but digital money was sort of this concept. And so the white paper came out and people said, huh, this might actually work. But interestingly, I think the thesis of the white paper was something different. I think the thesis was an attempt to restore the beginnings of trust. And if you fast forward from 2008 to today, I think the single thing we really need as a society today is trust. So what is trust? There's a legal, I'm going to pull up my iPhone because there's a legal definition of trust and a dictionary definition of trust. And I was really struck by the difference of these. So the definition in Webster's is a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, strength of someone or something. What I find interesting about that phrase is belief. So even in the dictionary, trust is about faith, not fact. But then you go to the courts, the legal definition, confidence placed on a person by making that person the nominal owner of property to be held or used for the benefit of one or more others. These two things have nothing to do with each other. So let's think about this. Which one of these was the blockchain is a symbol of? I think it's actually both belief and the property which allows two people to have an agreement on the existence and adjudication of an object, a property, or some other aspect of their relationship. And this is actually super powerful, and probably the most powerful thing about this innovation of the blockchain, and then the later innovations of scripting languages like Solidity and all of the things that have sort of come away from the original innovation of blockchain. But to understand that that first thing is trust, not just in the aspect of the verb, but the noun and the system. So what's interesting to me about this idea of trust is we as a society have never had less trust in our lives than we do today. You open up the newspaper, you turn on a television show, whatever channel you happen to be consuming at that time tells you a completely different story than the one you flip to 2 minutes later. In our banking system, we have people selling mortgages. I learned this thing the other day. There's a mortgage company that had worked out that by selling your loan on a certain cadence over a 30-year period, they could collect 6 more payments. If you fail to make those payments, they could repossess your house. This was a business model. This wasn't an accident. This is not the kind of place that we want to live, and it's not, we are always being gamed by systems, and systems that we help develop and architect. We invite that which destroys us is a very famous Balinese phrase. So going back to the internet, again, how I got involved in all this. So this guy, John Perry Barlow, was on the well. I ran a BBS in Southern California called the 818, which was a famous Where's BBS. If you know what that is, you are older than me, and I'm really sorry you're here. I think you had an account. A Where's BBS was a place where you could download demo software and evaluate it for purchase. Strangely, most of my customers didn't seem to purchase a lot of software. But as a 12-year-old boy in Southern California, I thought this was a good idea to provide this service to the community, and my community members rewarded me with dollar bills in the mail every month to keep their subscriptions alive. And John Perry Barlow and I started talking, and he really informed me this idea of encryption mattered. And the reason it mattered is because if you don't have the right to protect your privacy, you don't have the right to anything. And as we imagined a world back and forth on message boards and threads, where everything was digital, we said this thing, everything that can be digital will be, you suddenly realize that privacy and the right to privacy are intrinsic in being a human being. Otherwise, you're not a human being anymore, you're the Borg. That was actually John's quote, not mine. And so I got really excited. He founded an organization called the EFF. I was a member, didn't get super active. He taught me about encryption. But what that did is it started me on a journey of really thinking about the world in a very different place. And next we'll talk about innovation. So you have this encryption layer, and then what happened with Bitcoin from there? So it wandered around. I actually received my first 10 Bitcoin from a guy I think everyone here knows who he is, Brock Pierce. He gave it to me in 2000, let's call it 10. I think it was worth $10 when he gave it to me, maybe 11. It was actually 10 of them. I spent 2 on a pepperoni pizza 2 years later. I thought it was a good deal. But I didn't really believe in Bitcoin. I thought that digital money would for sure exist, but I didn't believe that people would create this bottoms up. I thought it would be a tops down thing. I assumed a government, a bank, someone would create something that had value, and then it would sort of escape their clutches and become like airline miles where it had value outside the original ecosystem. But actually what happened instead is a bottoms up revolution where people began to understand every time you talk to someone about crypto or the blockchain or Bitcoin, you begin to understand that the systems you base most of your faith on every day, fiat currency, credit cards, all of these things are based on that same level of trust and assumption and belief that this new one is. And in fact, most of the data you have tells you that your assumptions about these new systems are more accurate than your assumptions about the old. And so I watch people, and we used to call it the red pill. We don't anymore because there's apparently a really nasty group on the internet that has taken that name, where you give people this thing and they start to say, well, what about? And then you see them realize that this digital set of zeros and ones actually has more verifiability, more trust in its relationship between two parties than the other ones they've been relying on before. I would posit something interesting, which is that my daughter and I, as my daughter and I on television have a very different view of television, she thinks commercials are the most absurd thing in the world because she grew up in the UK and there weren't commercials on the BBC. And so until age 9, she'd never seen a commercial. She didn't know what it was. And so she does know what banks are, but I have a new daughter who's due this October. She will probably not have a bank account. My children all get their allowance in Ether. They spend a lot on CryptoKitties. Regularly had to step in. But the thing is bank accounts, when you think about this, and I watched this argument the other night. I was in Silicon Valley, I hosted a dinner, and I had a bunch of friends come. And one of my friends is the founder of Ripple, and he was sitting here, and over here is a bunch of venture capitalists. And it was the classic old tale of, you're going to destroy the world, you don't understand it. And I said, whoa, okay, let's have an honest Jeffersonian debate. Banks, should they or shouldn't they exist, and will they or won't they? And the debate began. And for everything this venture capitalist, and I won't name him because he's a friend of mine, he would say, well, how do you deal with spending? You got to spend fiat. And the guy said, I have a stable coin tied to a debit card. Actually, I have 5 of them. He said, oh, well, mortgages. He said, I can borrow against crypto, double collateralized against real estate, and the real estate rights can be held in the blockchain. Well, what about safe storage? I mean, where do you keep your crypto? He said, I cold store on Coinbase, and just in case, I have 2 or 3 other cold storages and a couple wallets and safes, which, by the way, is much safer than the $100,000 guarantee a US banking institution gives me, best case. As they watched this argument and debate go, I suddenly realized, it's not that I'm anti-bank. I think banks served a very useful purpose for a period of time. They were the bridge between physical gold coins and money to this new system of trust. But they are being supplanted because they're limited by a couple things. They're limited by regulatory limits. They're limited by state. So if you have a bank in the US and you want to do a business with a bank in the UK, there's a whole bunch of very complex rules about that. But if I want to send you crypto, there are no rules about that. And that is not going to change because the cat is well out of the bag. And so as you start to think about being and I'm a confirmed globalist, as we move to a global economy, the rules that we've lived in for so long around our behavior with money and all of the other things that would be built on top of this layer are changing. But what's missing, I think, right now, and this is actually something Brock and I have spent some time on, some other people in this room. My big fear right now is we are building a system with no moral code. So I hear everyone talking about Lambos to the moon. Myself, I've made a very significant amount of money on paper from this great currency and this great innovation. But the fact is, why are we doing all this? So I've been going to Burning Man for a very long time. We have the 10 principles. A friend of mine, Larry Ledesky, has a course at NYU. He teaches people how to have good purpose in their life. He has 8 principles. I think there's a couple of books that range from 6 to 12 principles. But most people build a moral code or system, whether you're religious or not, that directs your life. And my thesis today for you, my challenge to you, and feel free to email me to put my contact details up here in a second, how do we build that moral framework for what we're building today? Because I truly believe if the internet, which I was very deeply involved in founding Razorfish and 17 other companies, changed 6% of global GDP, e-commerce, communication, publishing, the innovation of blockchain, smart contracts, and languages like Solidity will touch 60 to 70% of the global economy. And we do not have the moral framework or Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. We don't have anything like this for crypto. And without this, we will surely perish. Thanks very much.